Hi, my name is Joe Cartwright. Welcome to my studio. My aim with these videos is to help you paint better watercolours. This series is all about the basics. If you're a beginner or have found painting with watercolours challenging, then please join in, as these videos are for you. And remember, if you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be informed of each new video I produce. Also, if you have any questions or requests, please leave them in the comment section below. I read them all. In this episode, we're going to build on the brush marks we learnt to do in our previous episode, and we're going to create a small painting that uses all those different types of brush marks that we can produce with a round watercolor brush. So we're going to start off by taking our quarter sheet and taping it to a board. Like this. And then I'll divide this into four equal segments, through the middle that way and through the middle this way. Doesn't have to be exact, but effectively now we've gone from a quarter sheet to a 1/16 sheet, and this is a good size when you're first learning, because you don't have to race when you're painting, because the smaller size with a size 12 brush gives you plenty of time to paint. Let's start with the drawing. This is a simple seascape, and when I do seascapes, the first line I place in my drawing is the horizon, and I run that all the way across. You can think of another term for horizon as eye level. When I'm doing street scenes and interior scenes, I still draw eye level. It's the same as the horizon, but you can't see the horizon in those situations, but you can when you're doing a seascape. So there's the horizon, and then in the distance I'm going to put in a little hill or cliff, and then I'm going to put in a second hill in front of that. It's closer to us there, and as objects get closer, come closer towards you, they move, where they touch the ground, they effectively move lower and lower down the paper away from eye level. So this hill is closer than that hill. If this is a relatively flat beach, if I have some figures on the beach, then their heads will all be around eye level. If they're exactly my height, if I was drawing it from my perspective, their heads would be right on eye level, because my eyes set eye level. If they're taller than me, their heads will be above eye level. If they're smaller than me, their heads will be below eye level. It doesn't matter, just make sure their heads are somewhere near eye level. And I'm going to put in the sand. The water shape is just a narrow wedge. I'm going to put some rocks here, just a small grouping, and I'll draw some figures, and I'll put one figure here, make him, figure is taller than me, so his head will be above eye level. Gives him some shorts and maybe a couple of legs, just marks, single marks for the legs. I'll put them in with brushes later. And I don't worry about arms. I'm really just drawing him in as if he's just wearing a t-shirt. And the only reason I'm putting that in because I want him to have a white top. So if I just draw it like that, that works. And I'll draw another figure near him. similar in size, maybe a bit smaller. There you go. And because their feet are touching the ground the same distance from eye level, it makes them look like they're walking next to one another. Now I can get rid of this eye level line here, now that I've got the figures in place. I'm going to put some rocks over here, extend the water back that way. And that's really it for our drawing. So the next step is to mix the colours we're going to use. Now for this exercise, we're just going to mix one colour, and it's going to be a dark, slightly warm black colour. So think of it as black with maybe a hint of pink to it. And I start by getting some water, and I determine how much water I need and put that in my palette. So I'm just going to create a little puddle of this particular colour. If you like, you could just use the Winsor Blue red shade and don't worry about any other colours. This is more an exercise in using all the brush marks that we learnt in the previous episode. So I'm going to start with the blue. Now these three colours are what we call the primary colours: red, blue and yellow. So if you mix three primary colours together, not necessarily in equal amounts, you can create black or close to black. We'll cover more about that when we look at colour mixing in more detail. Now I'll mix, what I normally do is I start by mixing the colour, and we'll test it, and it's a bit more blue than I wanted, so I'll add a little bit more pink and a little bit more yellow. And now it needs a bit more yellow and a bit more blue. Again, the colour is not critical. I just want one colour, but I want a dark colour. There we go. That's good enough. Okay, so I've mixed my colour, tested the strength, and this is about the middle strength that we're going to use in our painting. So I'll start with that, and then I'll modify it for the rest of the painting. So the first thing we're going to paint is the sky, and I'll pick up some of this paint. The sky is almost always the lightest part of your painting, so it's got to be, to make that mixture lighter, I add a lot more water to it. So I picked up some of that paint and moved it into this part of the palette, and that's a good colour for the sky. And you'll see I haven't drawn the clouds in. I normally don't put pencil marks in the sky. It's the only place I prefer not to see pencil marks. But I have a vision in my mind as to how I'm going to do the sky. Basically, I want a big cloud here, a small cloud there, and maybe a medium cloud here. So I've mixed my sky colour, and I paint my clouds by painting the space in between the clouds. So I will paint what would normally be the blue in between the cloud, and that will leave the cloud shape. And then I go in with clean water and modify that a little bit, and you'll see how I do it. And we're going to use a dry brush, what I call a modified dry brush, by loading the brush, taking maybe half the paint out, and starting from painting the tape. When you're painting clouds, the same will apply when you're doing trees. Try not to make your trees, try not to just paint up to the edge, paint over the tape, and it will add more space to your painting. So I've got my paints and I come in and see how those few hairs sticking to the paper are creating these lovely shapes for clouds. There's another little cloud, and in fact we'll throw in a bigger cloud there. And then I'll go back in and fill this space up. Pick up some water in my brush and dilute it some more. And I'll use that to establish the horizon line. And I'll paint into these hills. Now I'll clean my brush, tap it a couple of times, then I'll come back in. See how the hairs are just sticking to the paper, hardly any pressure on my brush, and then I come back and run the brush in, and wherever I touch the sky color, it flows into the cloud shape. Where I leave it alone, it leaves these nice little highlights. So we'll adjust that. I might throw in a bit more cloud here. There. Now if you lose all your whites, it's easy to get them back. As long as you do it quickly, you get scrunched up tissue and just lightly use it to create or modify your cloud shape. Just something like that. All right. We'll go back here and put a bit more color here, and that's it. Now, what I do next is I take that same cloud color and just paint through the hills and around the figures, because I want the figures to have that white top. And then this just, there we go. And then I'll get rid of any excess moisture down here. And a bit more cloud there. You can also lift the clouds up by cleaning your brush, squeezing all the moisture out, and then just lightly dabbing at it. But the main thing is not to lose all those white highlights, because they add a bit more life to your painting. Now I'm going to pick up some of this darker paint and just go back in, lightly indicate this distant hill, and I'll re-establish there, paint both of them. Now, and I don't mind if some of this hill bleeds over into the sky. Objects, as they move further away from you, get lighter in tone and softer. The edges become softer. By painting both hills together, in the next step, I'll be able to paint over this foreground hill, and that will bring it, optically make it come forward. If I had only just tried to paint the distant hill and then came back and painted the foreground hill over the top, if there's any overlap, I'd end up with a dark line, and I didn't want that. I think why you have a dark line is because watercolor is an additive medium. You have one layer, and then if you put any other layer on top, whether it's lighter or darker, the two add and it just gets darker. Okay, so this way you'll see I won't have any overlap there when it's done. I'll now go and get the hairdryer and dry this. I'm going to put another, just play with this cloud shape a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now it's still a little bit wet, but as long as the edge is dry, that's fine. I'll now go in with this darker paint. we go. We'll just paint the hill. And I'll get a little bit of this paint, just dilute it marginally, and I'm going to just establish this distant hill a bit better. There we go. Okay, while that's drying, I'm going to get some clean water and just put some clean water here. And then I'll pick up some of this stronger colour and we're going to paint the water. Now it's really quite a small shape, so I'll pick up my size 8 brush for this, and I'm going to use it to start by establishing the horizon line first. There, make some quick brush strokes, maybe take some moisture out. And we can paint the water just like that. And here, where it hits the wet area, I end up with a soft edge rather than a hard edge. I'll just break up this there, and I'll go in and throw in a little ripple through there. There we go. All right, now I'll pick up some of this darker paint, find a dry part of my palette, there, and then into that I'll add more paint. Now you have to be careful that the paint you add is from the dry part of your paint wells. Quite often around the edges you'll find a lot more moisture, and you can make the mistake of picking that up thinking it's quite thick, but really it isn't, and is very watery, and then rather than making your mixture darker, it dilutes it. Anyway, so I've mixed this stronger, and I'm going to paint in these rocks and leaving little highlights on them. Then I've got rocks here, quick little flicks, and maybe hopefully they'll read like little foam sprays. There we go. And this is sort of spread out beyond where because I went back in, this line has spread out further this way, and I can either lift that out with a damp brush, or I can leave it. And personally, I'm happy to leave it because I quite like that sort of shape that the watercolour has created. So now we're going to do the sand. The sand will be lighter than the water. So I'll pick up some of the colour of the water and then add some water to it, and that gives me a lighter tone. It's still not light enough. I'll just paint that, paint through their shorts. Let's get a bigger brush. get some stronger paint as I come forward. So remember, as things move further away, they get lighter, and the reverse happens as they come closer to you. Similar objects get darker. Anyway, this is more an exercise in learning how to use all these various brush strokes. I'm going to add a little bit more red. There we go. Good. And let that dry. When you're using tape like this, you have to make sure you don't get moisture pooling on the edge, otherwise you'll get a background that we call a cauliflower. We call it a cauliflower because it looks like a cauliflower. Basically what happens is if you get a point where there's a pool of water or very wet paint, and the paper above it starts to dry, and at some point that paper hits a certain dampness level that starts to suck that moisture back up, and that's what creates the cauliflower. All right, now these figures, I'm going to, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm assuming that the light is coming from this corner, okay? And the importance of that is, that means these figures, their tops will have a side that's in shadow, and a side that's in light. Now we'll do a bit more work on these figures. I'm going to just create another pool of thicker paint here. I only need a tiny amount, so that's good enough. So what we'll do with that, give the figures some shorts. And then we'll use the same colour, maybe a little bit lighter, add a bit of water to it. And their arms. And for their legs, we'll just there we go. And we'll use the same for their heads. Leave a little highlight on this side. There we go. Now, ideally when you do this, you need to be a bit more accurate than I was with these painting around their heads. So I'm just adjusting that now. There we go. That's good. Now, because the light's coming from this side, they'll have a shadow. And the shadow will just be a little line like that. Their two shadows can merge depending on, just the time of the day. And the shadow, if one of their feet is touching the ground, the shadow will touch that foot. If a foot is above the ground, then the shadow doesn't touch it. It starts a little way off. So in this case, we've got each has one foot touching the ground, so our shadow starts from there and then moves out. I'm going to just throw in some squiggles here as just some seaweed or something on the beach, just to break that up. in the wet part of the sand, if we put in something that little dots like that, and they're just birds, seabirds of some description, and that's their reflection. You can feather it out a little bit with your finger. If the birds are on the dry sand, say here, put a little dot for their head, another one here. Because they're on dry sand, they won't have a reflection, but they'll have a little shadow. So that's the difference. And then in the sky, you can put some birds here. And birds are handy because they can be used to guide the eye. I want the eye to travel around this area. So if I have a bird here that's flying into the painting, and then another one a bit over here, and then maybe one somewhere here, that helps keep the eye moving around this part of the painting. This is just about done now. Probably the only things I would do, I might darken this water in the distance a bit and add in some undulations just to make it a bit more interesting. And then I'll soften some of those. Basically, I clean the brush, take out half the water, and then just run it across some of these shapes so that they're not quite so sharp. I can do that because I dried the paper first. You can't do that while the paper's still damp, or you'll just spread the paint every which way. There we go. Maybe a little shadow underneath some of these waves. Throw in some more smaller rocks over here. And that'll do. It's just an exercise. Now what I suggest you do is you paint one of these, or paint 2 or 3, whatever, and then put them aside, and in 10 weeks time come back and have another go at it and see how your skills have developed in that time. I'll just sign it. I like to use a brush when I'm signing, so I just need a brush with a good point on it. There we go. Make these rocks a bit more textured. Great. Okay, well, you have a go, and I'll see you for the next video. The next video will cover some color mixing and mixing and producing a color wheel and playing with mixing different tones. So I hope to see you then. Bye-bye.